Boyfriend sabotaged my car steering to unalive me for life insurance money, planned the accident location perfectly, nearly succeeded in it. The crash happened while I was driving home from my evening shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. I was taking the same route I'd driven hundreds of times before, a familiar road that I could navigate in my sleep. I remember feeling tired but alert, looking forward to getting home to my apartment and unwinding after a particularly stressful day in the cardiac unit. I'd been working double shifts for weeks, saving money for the vacation my boyfriend Marcus and I had planned for Christmas. The last thing I remember clearly was approaching the sharp curve near the old bridge. I was going the speed limit, maybe even a bit under because I was in no hurry. Then suddenly my steering wheel locked up completely. I yanked on it desperately, but it wouldn't budge in either direction. My car went straight instead of following the curve, crashed through the guardrail, and tumbled down a steep embankment. I must have hit my head because everything went black after that. I woke up 3 days later in the ICU with a concussion, 2 broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, and my left leg in a cast. The doctor said I was incredibly lucky to be alive. Car accidents like that are usually fatal, Dr. Rodriguez explained. The fact that you survived going through that guardrail and rolling down that embankment is nothing short of miraculous. Marcus was sitting beside my hospital bed when I regained consciousness, holding my hand and looking like he hadn't slept in days. He said he'd barely left the hospital since the accident. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, tears in his eyes. "When the police called and said you'd been in a serious accident, I couldn't breathe. I've never been so scared in my life." My parents flew in from across the country, and my sister took time off work to help care for me. Everyone kept talking about how fortunate I was to survive such a terrible accident, how it was a miracle I was still alive. The police report concluded that mechanical failure had caused the crash. According to Officer Thompson, who investigated the scene, my steering mechanism had malfunctioned, causing me to lose control of the vehicle. "It's rare, but it happens," he explained when he visited me in the hospital. "Sometimes a component fails without warning. Modern cars are reliable, but they're still machines with hundreds of moving parts. There's really no way to predict or prevent something like this." My insurance company accepted the mechanical failure explanation without question and agreed to pay for my medical expenses and replace my totaled car. Everyone seemed satisfied with this conclusion except me. Something felt wrong about the whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly bothered me. Maybe it was the head injury affecting my thinking, or maybe it was just the trauma of nearly dying, but I had a nagging feeling that I was missing something important. "You need to stop obsessing about the details," Marcus said when I kept asking questions about what had happened. "You survived a terrible accident. The important thing is that you're alive and recovering. Just focus on getting better." He was right, of course. I should have been grateful to be alive and focused on my recovery, but the questions wouldn't go away. They haunted me during the long days of physical therapy and the sleepless nights when pain medication couldn't quiet my racing thoughts. During my weeks of recovery at home, I found myself thinking constantly about the moments before the crash. I'd driven that route countless times without any problems. My car had been recently serviced and was running perfectly. The steering had never shown any signs of problems or unusual behavior. "Why are you torturing yourself with this?" my sister asked when she found me reading about steering system failures online. "The police investigated and determined it was mechanical failure. You need to accept it and move on with your life." But I couldn't move on. Something about the official explanation didn't sit right with me, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit no matter how hard you tried to force it into place. Marcus was increasingly concerned about what he called my obsession with understanding the accident details. "Sarah, you're driving yourself crazy with this," he said one evening when he found me researching car safety recalls and mechanical failure statistics. "You nearly died. That's traumatic enough without torturing yourself trying to find some deeper meaning in what happened." "I just need to understand," I replied. "Something doesn't feel right about this whole situation." "What doesn't feel right?" "Your car broke down, you crashed, you survived. End of story. Sometimes terrible things just happen for no reason." When I was finally able to drive again, I went to the impound lot where my wrecked car was being stored before disposal. I wanted to see the damage for myself, maybe get some closure by understanding what had actually happened. The car was completely destroyed. The front end was crushed beyond recognition, the roof was caved in, and the entire vehicle looked like it had been put through a giant blender. Looking at the wreckage, it truly was amazing that I'd survived it all. "Terrible shame," said Jimmy, the lot attendant, as he led me to where my car was parked among dozens of other wrecked vehicles. "Beautiful car before this happened. Such a waste. What caused the accident again?" "Steering failure," I replied automatically, repeating what I'd been told countless times. Jimmy frowned as he examined the wreckage more closely. "Steering failure, you say? That's interesting. What do you mean?" "Well, I've been working with wrecked cars for 20 years, and I've seen plenty of accidents caused by steering problems. Usually there's specific damage to the steering column or the tie rods, but looking at this." He trailed off, walking around to examine different angles. "What are you seeing?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "The steering components that I can see look relatively intact, which is weird if that's what caused the accident. Usually when steering fails, you can see clear evidence of what broke." Jimmy wasn't a trained mechanic, just someone who dealt with wrecked cars all day. But his observation planted a seed of doubt that began growing immediately. I contacted Tom, a mechanic I trusted who had serviced my car for years. I asked him if he could examine the wreckage to give me a better understanding of what had actually failed. "I can take a look," Tom agreed. But after that kind of damage, it might be hard to determine exactly what happened. The impact probably destroyed a lot of the evidence. We met at the impound lot the following week. Tom spent over an hour examining every accessible part of the steering system, taking pictures and making detailed notes. This is very strange, like he said, finally looking troubled. What did you find? Well, the steering column itself isn't damaged in a way that suggests mechanical failure. And the tie rods look fine too, considering the impact damage. If the steering had failed due to a normal mechanical problem, I'd expect to see specific types of damage that just aren't here. So what could have caused the steering to lock up? Tom was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. There are other ways steering can fail. Ways that wouldn't necessarily leave obvious mechanical damage after an accident like this. Like what? Well, tampering for one. If someone knew what they were doing, they could sabotage a steering system in ways that would cause failure at a specific time or under specific conditions. The word tampering hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying someone might have done this on purpose? I'm not saying anything definitive, Tom backpedaled quickly. I'm just noting that the damage pattern doesn't match what I'd typically expect from random mechanical failure. It's possible there's an explanation I'm not seeing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The possibility that someone had deliberately caused my accident was almost too terrifying to consider. But once the thought was in my head, I couldn't shake it. Who would want to hurt me? I was a nurse who helped people for a living. I didn't have any enemies that I knew of. I hadn't been involved in any serious conflicts or disputes. The idea that someone might have tried to kill me seemed absurd, but Tom's observations were troubling. If the steering failure hadn't been caused by normal mechanical problems, what had caused it? Over the next few days, I found myself analyzing every relationship in my life, looking for anyone who might have a motive to hurt me. But nothing made sense. My relationships with family, friends, and coworkers were all positive. I couldn't think of anyone who would benefit from my death, except a horrifying thought occurred to me. I was the beneficiary of a substantial life insurance policy through my job at the hospital. If I died, the payout would be significant, enough to set someone up financially for years. But who else knew about the policy? I'd never discussed it with anyone except Marcus. I'd told Marcus about the life insurance policy months earlier when we were talking about financial planning and our future together. He'd seemed interested in the details, asking questions about the payout amount and the terms of the policy. At the time, I'd thought he was just being responsible, thinking about our financial security as a couple. Now his questions took on a more sinister tone, but Marcus loved me. We'd been together for 2 years and had talked about getting married. He'd been by my side constantly since the accident, taking care of me and supporting my recovery. The idea that he could have tried to kill me was insane, wasn't it? I started paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior, looking for anything suspicious or out of character. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He was still loving, attentive, and concerned about my well-being. But then I began noticing small things that bothered me. He seemed very interested in my recovery timeline and when I'd be able to drive again. He asked detailed questions about my memory of the accident and seemed relieved when I told him I couldn't remember much. It's probably better that you don't remember, he said. Traumatic memories can be really damaging. Sometimes it's healthier to just let the past go. He also seemed unusually concerned about my conversations with the mechanics and investigators. When I mentioned that Tom had examined the car wreckage, Marcus became tense. Why are you still pursuing this? He asked. What's the point of having more people look at the car? It's not going to change what happened. I just want to understand what went wrong, I said. What went wrong is that you had a terrible accident. You need to stop looking for conspiracies and focus on moving forward with your life. The word conspiracies bothered me. I hadn't suggested there was a conspiracy, just that I wanted to understand the mechanical failure that had nearly killed me. Why was Marcus so eager for me to stop asking questions? I decided to do some investigating on my own. I started by looking into Marcus's financial situation more carefully than I ever had before. We'd been talking about getting married, so I'd assumed we'd eventually combine our finances, but I'd never actually seen his bank statements or credit reports. What I found was disturbing. Marcus was in significant debt, credit cards maxed out, student loans in default, and what appeared to be gambling debts to some very unsavory people. He'd hidden his financial problems completely. I'd had no idea that he was in such serious trouble. The life insurance payout would be enough to solve all of Marcus's financial problems and leave him with a substantial amount left over. If I died, he would inherit everything as my designated beneficiary, since we'd been talking about marriage and I'd updated my beneficiary information to include him. But discovering his financial problems wasn't proof that he'd tried to kill me. Lots of people have debt issues without resorting to murder. I needed more evidence before I could seriously consider the possibility that my boyfriend had attempted to murder me. I decided to examine my car's service records more carefully. If someone had tampered with the steering system, they would have needed access to the vehicle and knowledge of how to sabotage it effectively. Marcus had access to my car regularly. He'd borrowed it numerous times over the past few months, sometimes keeping it overnight when his own car was having problems. He also had mechanical knowledge from working at his uncle's auto repair shop during high school and college. But when had he last borrowed my car? I tried to remember, and a chilling realization hit hit me. Marcus had borrowed my car just 3 days before the accident, claiming his car wouldn't start and he needed transportation to get to work. 3 days would have been enough time for a subtle sabotage to take effect, especially if it was designed to fail under specific conditions like taking a sharp curve at a certain speed. I felt sick thinking about it. Had Marcus used my trust in him to gain access to my car so he could sabotage it and kill me for the insurance money? But I still needed more proof. The financial motive and opportunity weren't enough to convince me that the man I loved had tried to murder me. That's when I remembered something that had bothered me at the time, but that I dismissed as unimportant. The night of the accident, Marcus had called me at work to ask when I'd be driving home. "Just want to make sure you get home safely," he'd said. "The roads can be dangerous at night." Oh God, sorry. At the time, I'd thought it was sweet that he was concerned about my safety. Now, I realized he might have been making sure I'd be driving the route where he'd planned for the sabotage to take effect. If my steering had been tampered with to fail at that specific curve, Marcus would have needed to know when I'd be driving that route. His call to check on my timing suddenly seemed much more sinister, but there was still a part of me that couldn't believe Marcus was capable of something so evil. This was the man who'd held me while I cried about losing patients at the hospital, who'd surprised me with flowers on bad days, who'd talked about spending his life with me. How could someone fake that level of affection and intimacy while simultaneously planning your murder? I decided I needed professional help to figure out what had really happened. I contacted a private investigator named Detective Rodriguez, who specialized in suspicious accidents and insurance fraud. "I know this sounds crazy," I told her during our first meeting, "but I think someone might have sabotaged my car to cause the accident." "It doesn't sound crazy at all," she replied. "I see cases like this more often than you'd think. Insurance fraud through staged accidents is more common than people realize." I explained my concerns about the mechanical examination results, Marcus's financial problems, and the suspicious timing of his phone call the night of the accident. "These are all concerning patterns," Detective Rodriguez agreed. "Let me do some digging and see what I can find." Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Rodriguez investigated Marcus's background more thoroughly than I ever could have on my own. What she found was horrifying. Marcus had a history I'd never known about. He'd been involved in several suspicious insurance claims over the years, a house fire that destroyed his apartment, a theft claim for expensive electronics, and a previous car accident where he'd claimed severe injuries but had recovered remarkably quickly. "This is a pattern of insurance fraud going back at least 5 years, Detective Rodriguez explained. "Your boyfriend has been making money by staging fake accidents and disasters." "But he seemed so genuine about everything," I said, still struggling to accept that Marcus had deceived me so completely. "People who are good at insurance fraud are also good at manipulation and deception. He's had years to perfect his technique." Detective Rodriguez also discovered that Marcus had been researching car accident staging techniques online, visiting forums where people discussed how to cause untraceable mechanical failures, and reviewing case studies of successful insurance fraud schemes. "He'd been planning this for months," she told me. "The online searches started right around the time you told him about your life insurance policy." The evidence was overwhelming, but I still needed definitive proof that Marcus had actually tampered with my car. Detective Rodriguez suggested we set up a controlled situation to get him to confess. If he thinks you're getting closer to the truth, he might panic and reveal information that confirms his involvement, she explained. We arranged for me to have a conversation with Marcus where I would mention that investigators were planning to re-examine my car wreckage more thoroughly. Detective Rodriguez would be listening from another room, recording everything. "I got a call from the insurance investigator today," I told Marcus that evening. "They want to do a more detailed examination of my car. Apparently there are some questions about what caused the steering failure." Marcus's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale and his hands started shaking. "What kind of questions?" he asked, trying to sound casual but failing completely. "They want to bring in specialists to examine the steering system more closely. Something about the damage patterns not matching typical mechanical failures." "That's ridiculous," Marcus said, his voice rising. "It was clearly mechanical failure. The police already determined that." "I know, but the insurance company wants to be thorough. They're talking about bringing in forensic experts who specialize in accident reconstruction." Marcus stood up and started pacing, clearly agitated. "Sarah, you need to tell them to stop this investigation. It's just going to drag things out and cause more stress for you." "Why would it cause stress if it was just a normal accident?" Because investigations are always stressful, and you've been through enough already." His explanation was weak and unconvincing. An innocent person wouldn't be concerned about a more thorough investigation proving what they already believe to be true. "Maybe the investigation will give us better answers about what went wrong," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "We already have answers. Your steering failed. Why isn't that enough for you?" The desperation in his voice was obvious. Marcus was terrified of a more detailed investigation, and there was only one reason why an innocent person would feel that way. "You seem really upset about this," I observed. Marcus realized he was overreacting and tried to backtrack. "I'm not upset. I just think you've been through enough, and I don't want you to have to relive the trauma unnecessarily. But it was too late. His extreme reaction had confirmed what I'd been afraid to believe. Marcus was hiding something about my accident. Detective Rodriguez had heard everything. After Marcus left that evening, she came out of hiding with a grim expression. His reaction was very telling, she said. An innocent person wouldn't be that concerned about a more thorough investigation. He's definitely hiding something. So what do we do now? Now we gather enough evidence to prove what he did and make sure he faces consequences for attempting to murder you. The next phase of the investigation involved examining Marcus's activities more closely in the days leading up to my accident. Detective Rodriguez obtained surveillance footage from various locations and tracked Marcus's movements during the time when he'd borrowed my car. The footage showed Marcus visiting an auto parts store where he purchased tools that could be used to sabotage a steering system. He'd paid cash and worn a baseball cap pulled low over his face, clearly trying to avoid being identified. He knew exactly what he was doing, Detective Rodriguez explained as we reviewed the footage. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He planned this carefully and tried to cover his tracks. We also found evidence that Marcus had researched the specific curve where my accident occurred. He'd visited the location multiple times in the weeks before the accident, presumably to identify the best spot for the sabotage to take effect. He chose that curve because it was isolated enough that there wouldn't be immediate help available, but not so remote that your body might not be found quickly, Detective Rodriguez explained. He needed you to be found relatively soon so the life insurance claim could be processed. The coldness of his planning was breathtaking. Marcus had calculated not just how to kill me, but how to ensure my death would result in the maximum financial benefit with the minimum risk of being caught. But we still needed to prove that he'd actually sabotaged my car. Detective Rodriguez arranged for a forensic expert to examine the wreckage one more time, looking specifically for signs of tampering rather than random mechanical failure. Dr. Patterson, a forensic mechanical engineer, spent hours examining every accessible part of the steering system. Using specialized tools and techniques, he was able to identify subtle signs of deliberate sabotage. The steering linkage was weakened in a very specific way, Dr. Patterson explained. This wasn't random wear or sudden failure. Someone deliberately compromised the system so it would fail under stress, like taking a sharp turn at moderate speed. How can you be certain it was deliberate? The pattern of damage is too precise to be accidental. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and had significant mechanical knowledge. Dr. Patterson's analysis provided the final piece of evidence we needed. Marcus had deliberately sabotaged my car's steering system, timing the failure to occur when I would be driving on a dangerous stretch of road. Detective Rodriguez presented all the evidence to the police. Within days, Marcus was arrested and charged with attempted murder and insurance fraud. When the police came to arrest him, Marcus initially tried to maintain his innocence. But when confronted with the overwhelming evidence, the surveillance footage, the forensic analysis, his suspicious online searches, and his financial motive, he finally broke down and confessed. I never meant for it to actually happen, he sobbed during his confession. I thought maybe she'd just get injured and I could collect on the disability insurance instead. It was a lie, of course. The sabotage had been designed to cause a fatal accident, not a minor injury. But Marcus was still trying to minimize his culpability, even while confessing to attempted murder. The trial was a nightmare. Having to face Marcus in court, listening to the details of how he'd planned my death, seeing the evidence of his deception and manipulation, it was almost more traumatic than the accident itself. The defendant conducted months of research and planning before implementing his scheme to murder the victim for financial gain, the prosecutor argued during closing statements. This was not a crime of passion or momentary weakness. This was calculated, premeditated, attempted murder. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that he'd been under financial stress and hadn't been thinking clearly. But the evidence of his systematic planning made it impossible to claim the attempt on my life had been anything other than deliberate. Marcus was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He also faced federal charges for the insurance fraud scheme, which added additional years to his sentence. But the legal consequences were only part of my recovery process. The psychological trauma of discovering that someone I'd loved and trusted had tried to kill me was devastating. Betrayal trauma is particularly difficult to process, my therapist explained. When someone close to you violates your trust so fundamentally, it can affect your ability to trust anyone in the future. She was right. Even now, years later, I struggle with trusting people completely. The knowledge that Marcus had been able to deceive me so thoroughly while planning my death has made me question my ability to judge people's character. I've had to learn to trust my instincts again, to pay attention to red flags instead of dismissing them, and to remember that people aren't always who they seem to be. The experience also taught me the importance of asking questions when something doesn't feel right. If I hadn't investigated the inconsistencies in the accident report, Marcus might have gotten away with attempted murder and could have tried again. Your refusal to accept the official explanation probably saved your life. life, Detective Rodriguez told me after the trial. If Marcus had succeeded in convincing you it was just a random accident, he might have tried other methods to kill you. Looking back, I can see warning signs that I missed at the time. Marcus's interest in my insurance policy had been more than casual curiosity. His financial secrecy had been a red flag I'd ignored. His pattern of convenient problems that required borrowing my car should have made me suspicious. But I'd been in love and had trusted him completely. It never occurred to me that someone who claimed to love me could be planning to murder me for money. The accident that wasn't an accident changed everything about how I approach relationships and trust. I'm more cautious now, perhaps too cautious sometimes. But I'm also alive, which I might not have been if I'd continued to trust blindly. Sometimes people ask me how I could have missed the signs that Marcus was dangerous. The truth is that skilled manipulators are very good at presenting themselves as trustworthy while hiding their true intentions. Marcus had spent 2 years building my trust, learning my vulnerabilities, and positioning himself to benefit from my death. He'd been patient, calculating, and convincing. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I'd accept the official explanation of my accident without question. He hadn't counted on my refusal to let the inconsistencies go uninvestigated. That stubborn curiosity about what had really happened that night saved my life and ensured that Marcus faced consequences for his actions. The accident that wasn't an accident taught me that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we need to be most careful about trusting. Love isn't always genuine, concern isn't always real, and the person sleeping next to you might be planning your death. It's a hard lesson to learn, but an important one. Trust should be earned gradually and verified continuously. When something doesn't feel right, it's worth investigating, even if the truth is more terrifying than you want to believe. Because sometimes the accident really isn't an accident at all.